Okay. Now it should be. Now it's working. See, it's doing what it needs to do. So, let's just introduce ourselves, even though we already have. My name is Howard Kunick, hearing officer today with the City of Punta Gorda.
I'm Brian Koji with Allen Norton and Blue to Tampa, Florida, here representing the department head.
Phil Wickstrom, I'm the department head for Human Resources and Risk Manager for the city.
Me too. Oh, I'm Lisa. I'm the court reporter.
Jim Brantley with Donnelly and Gross here representing Florida PBA.
David D., also with the Florida PBA, representing legal.
Jessica Farley with iCard Merrill, serving as legal advisor to the city manager.
Okay, so we are going to have this hearing informal with decorum. The burden of proof rests with the HR manager, Phil Wickstrom, to establish just cause by a preponderance of evidence in support of his March 9th, 2017 termination decision. As far as presentation of evidence, first, we'll have Attorney Koji on behalf of the HR manager, Phil Wickstrom. Then we will have Attorneys Brantley and D on behalf of Officer Coel. Direct testimony of witnesses, cross-examination, and then a brief redirect examination. Invited to present opening statements and closing statements, if you want. You're not required. You can have an opening statement and a closing statement, and the order will be Brian Koji first, and for opening, and then Brian Koji will be last for the closing. Formal rules of procedure and evidence do not apply. Admissibility standards for evidence are relaxed. All evidence of a type commonly relied upon by reasonably prudent persons in the conduct of their affairs shall be admissible, whether or not such evidence would be admissible in a Florida court of law. Any part of the evidence may be received in written form. All testimony of parties and witnesses shall be made under oath, and the court reporter will swear the person in. Irrelevant, immaterial, harassing, defamatory, or unduly repetitive evidence will be excluded, and will accept post-hearing briefing on evidentiary or other issues that arise during the course of the hearing. So let me pass this letter out. I know we had a question about that.
Thank you.
And so let's talk about that. We're okay with a post-hearing briefing. And can you have that to me in a Word format within 7 business days after we provide you with the written transcript? Is that okay?
I would like more time than that, if we can.
How much time do you need? Again, this is after the written transcript.
Right. So when are you thinking the transcripts might arrive?
Well, it depends on how long the meeting goes today. If it's not that long, we're willing to pay for a quick turnaround. Like if we can do it in a day, great.
Okay, but then the city's, of course, you're going to take time to redact them before they're provided to us.
We do.
Right?
We have to redact what we have to redact. That will take a good 2 to 3 days.
Right. So let's say that we probably don't have the transcripts. We don't probably have them till the end of next week, probably
Okay.
the 28th.
All right. I'm willing to make my decision within 14 days of receipt of the of your briefs.
Could we have till the close of business Monday, May 15th?
What's today?
There's the 20th.
So let's say we have it available.
So if we got the transcripts, that's assuming we're getting the transcripts around the 28th, which is Friday of next week.
Right.
That gives you like 2
2 weeks. That would give us two weeks.
And if you get it before, you still want it till the 15th.
Yeah, I think so.
That's
That'll
fine with
give
me.
you-
That's
okay.
fine with me.
Fine with you?
Yes.
Okay. So what's the date?
Close of business Monday,
May 15th.
May 15th.
Do you want those transmitted electronically, email, mail? Email?
Word format. You can email
Word
them.
format,
Yeah, email. Let's keep it easy. So we're going to do it May
15th.
15th. Okay.
When you
so-
say close of business, what close of business are we talking about?
Well,
Five
Our close of
PM?
business is
Yeah, 5 p.m. They
5
need to
p.m.
be.
is the normal.
Okay, ours is 4:30.
Oh,
May
okay.
15th will be the due date for the post-hearing briefs.
Okay.
All right? Is that okay?
Yes, sir. Now, is that, just for clarification, post-hearing briefs in lieu of doing a closing today, or do you still
No, you
want
can do it.
closing,
You
or-
can do a closing today if you want. It's all voluntary. It's all voluntary. You can do an opening. You can do a closing. Again, it's all voluntary. Any other questions before we get started?
I have one procedural question. I had intended, and we talked earlier and mentioned we can put some of this in through writing. And we talked earlier, obviously we've got some FDLE audio and written transcripts. And rather than rehash all of that and call everybody in, we were agreeable to, where needed, present that testimony just through the FDLE transcripts. Along those lines, I'm not going to rely that much on that, but the chief's statement that was given the night of the incident, I think late that night or early the next morning, we would present in evidence. I have that in audio format. It's about 23 minutes long. We can either listen to that at the outset after the opening. I also have it as a transcript, so
Yeah,
I don't care if we...
It's in our book as well. The transcript of
Right.
it is in our
Presented a
book.
transcript.
Do we want to listen to it, I guess, is the question, or if we're going to do post-hearing briefs and transcript, we might cut 25 minutes out if you prefer just put it in the document form and then reference in our briefs or whatnot which portions we want to. I'm okay either
Do you
way.
want to hear it?
No.
No. We plan on submitting it as a written document.
It's one of the verbatims that we've, and we wanted also to stipulate to the complete FDLE report to include the verbatim transcripts from all of the sworn witness statements that were taken that were mentioned or that took part as a part of that FDLE investigation. And we have taken some of those, like 5 of them, and included the actual written transcript here to go through. We've got the complete FDLE report here, but the FDLE report just summarized each of those interviews. With particular, I think it's 5 or 6 of them, we've actually taken the whole verbatim sworn statement and included it as evidence and tagged it. And the only thing that we really have in evidence other than that is the report issued by Arnold Gibbs.
Okay, so then we don't have to listen to it.
Okay, that's fine. Now,
So
put some
both
time.
parties agree to the admission of those statements into evidence? Is it true?
Right. We have agreed previously
Yes.
that the FDLE report in its entirety and any transcripts that either side chose out of that would come in as
Would come
evidence.
in, yeah.
Right,
Okay.
so just to be clear, you're not introducing all the transcripts. You're the whole report, which is the summaries, and then select transcripts.
Right, well, right, that we've copied and introduced as evidence. Now, I think there's 1 or 2 others that we may make reference to in our presentation that we didn't copy the whole transcript and put in here, but it's mentioned, it's one of the interviews that was conducted by FDLE, and there's a summary of it included in that FDLE report.
So for those, you're relying on the summary?
Yes.
And just if you're not reviewed.
But we will also reference you on those 1 or 2 other occasions to the particular page number from the verbatim transcript, because the way FDLE provided that to us, it was in a one solid, huge PDF document with sequential numbering. So, there's I think there's 1,300 or 1,400 pages or something of it.
Yeah, the report's like 250 pages. The transcripts are like 1,150 pages.
Right.
So
we may reference those pages so that in terms of, and I'm assuming the city manager already has access to that anyway, it would be easy to find if we reference. But for the most part, we've actually copied the pages and selected copies that were the ones that we're going to spend the bulk of the time.
I have access to it.
Yeah, and not to complicate anything, but the PD I know has broken that PDF down and organized it to where the paging is better. I don't know if that's too late in the game to do. I'm happy to get you guys copies of that if it makes it easier. If we just want to work off that big file and the page numbers that are already there, we can do that too.
Yeah, and I just used the page number, not the page number in the document, the page number as it was numbered.
Like the bait stamp.
Yeah,
The bait stamp.
bait stamp number
Yeah.
that they put on it.
Correct. Which is on the bottom right corner.
And I'll reference those as we go through.
And I'll use those too then as
Okay.
well.
Okay, so, any other stuff before we get started?
Do you want to, if while we're there, I'm fine stipulating into all of your exhibits that they're all admissible to the extent that's what they are. I'm happy to do it. I don't know if you want to take a look before we get going in at what I have and go through and see if we can stipulate all of it you should have seen before, I think. But I'm happy to go through it to try and streamline today's hearing.
Okay, so you're okay with all of these? All these exhibits? Okay.
Do you want to mark this as your, this whole binder as your?
Well, or we can just reference them by the number, by our exhibit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The only one, by the way, let me make a correction here in this book. The only one that I've taken out because after reviewing it more, it was duplicative and unnecessary was number 11. So number 11 is not in the book. It was unnecessary. But that testimony exists elsewhere on several occasions, so we didn't need the whole statement. But we would just number ours as they're presented here, 1 through 12, with no one number 11.
Got it.
And we have a copy of it we're going to provide to the court reporter too.
Close the hearing.
Okay.
So are you okay with Brian's exhibits? I've not looked at them.
And let me, I am not going to offer Exhibit 6. It's a canine unit, general order. I'd include it thinking I may, but I don't think plan to.
Okay.
A lot of the other stuff comes out of the FDLE report. And my 13, I think, if you've included all of the summaries from the FDLE report,
The entire report in its entirety is under our tab 3.
Number 3, yeah.
Then 13 is redundant in mine. I've just excerpted from the report without the transcript, so we can strike off 13 and 6 from mine. It looks like my 1 is probably the same as yours. It's the discharge letter. So. The only document I think, I'm not sure if you've seen before, I think maybe you have, is Exhibit 11 is just an internal sheet we compiled, the chief compiled, of listing Officer Cole's various certifications, trainings, and courses. Rather than put them all in, they just listed them.
I don't have any objection.
I don't think that's part of the FDLE, but that's the only thing I think you wouldn't maybe not have seen.
No, we're fine with all the remainder of the.
And some of these other ones, I think your number 12 is also, I think, in the FDLE report.
It's in that.
But it doesn't matter.
FDLE report.
We don't object to it.
That letter is contained. It's one of the letters is contained in the body of that report.
Yeah.
And I apologize. I have an actual index that I forgot to put on the front of everybody. So
That would make it quicker for us.
I didn't
Brian.
have a hole punch what I had, unfortunately.
So number 6 is a no?
6 and 13, you said you're.
Yeah.
They're duplicates.
Yeah, 6 and 13 are duplicate, so we can X them out if you want.
Number 6 and number 13, duplicate.
I'm just going to take them out here.
So we're okay with everything else?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
got that number 11 is not in our book also,
Yeah, it's blank.
from this book,
No,
the white book.
there is no
There is no number 11.
PBA Exhibit 11.
Right, we got that.
Okay, all right.
Not included.
Okay, so just to summarize, parties both stipulate to all the exhibits in the PBA book. Parties stipulate to the admissibility of all the exhibits listed in the department head books.
Right. And I believe the stipulation includes any of the verbatim transcripts that are referenced in that.
But not there
Yeah,
because
but
they're
they're not
the
there.
volume.
Right.
But the city manager has copies of it.
Yeah, he has a reference. And where they're used and not duplicated here, a reference to the page number, so that for ease of.
Great.
We'll do that in the brief and today. We'll reference them.
Okay.
So then I guess we can start, if you want, with opening statements. That's all voluntary.
Yeah, I would like to make just a brief opening statement. Obviously, I'm here representing the decision maker, Phil Wickstrom, in this case. I think we all know what occurred on August 9th of last year, but I'll run through briefly. The appeal is obviously over Officer Lee Cole's termination. He was terminated in March 9, 2017 by Mr. Wickstrom based upon the events of August 9th of last year. It's an unfortunate incident, but I really don't think the facts of the incident are going to be disputed. Whether or not discipline was appropriate, level of discipline, I think, is probably going to be the dispute that you're going to have to decide, Mr. Koenig. Phil Wickstrom's the HR manager. He's not the police chief. He was delegated this decision because the police chief was involved in the incident and was also charged by the state attorney's office. Last August 9th, 2016, the police department held a Citizens Academy for the Chamber of Commerce group. Just short of, I think, 50 people attended that. It's a 2-hour, this section was a 2-hour briefing over the operations of the Punta Gorda Police Department. In our book, we've included the agenda for that, but it essentially involved a little bit of classroom time with Chief Tom Lewis explaining the functions and many areas of service that the police department provides. And after the classroom portion and a tour of the department, it went outside to do a few tours of static displays. It's the Marine unit, bicycle unit, familiarizing your local leaders, community leaders with the equipment and services that the department provides. As has been done several times in other academies in the past, it was then to transition to a role-playing training demonstration where a random member of the group was selected to play the role of a police officer responding to a scene. Officer Lee Cole was playing the role of the perpetrator. The tragic chain of events, Officer Cole was armed with his own personal .38 special revolver, and he loaded it with live ammunition, thinking that it was blank ammunition. A series of what we think poor judgment on his part led to that, most notably just the inability of Officer Cole to distinguish between the live ammunition and the blanks. We'll go through and we'll show you some of the pictures and how that occurred. Suffice to say, during a role-playing exercise, by design, he was to shoot off the blanks, which he did, and several bullets struck and ultimately killed Mary Knowlton. You're not going to hear from the department head or anything today that he intended to do that. We all know he didn't intentionally kill Mary Knowlton. But that doesn't mean he didn't commit negligence or acts which are worthy of discipline. And in the department head, Phil Wickstrom's mind, it was worthy of discharge. So what did he do? Well, quite candidly, what he did was he failed to recognize that he had live ammunition commingled with his blanks. There were several telltale warning signs, most notably the fact that the boxes of ammunition are labeled. Blanks are labeled blanks. The live ammunition has no indication that they were blanks. In fact, it has indications that they're not, the grain weight and that sort of thing. They're packaged differently. He should have known he's a trained law enforcement officer. It's a tragic accident, but it's an accident worthy of discipline. He's also been unfortunately charged, no decision from the city, but by the state attorney with a first-degree felony. He's been off on leave. He had been off on leave from the date of the incident, August 9, all the way up until he was ultimately discharged by Mr. Wickstrom's decision. He still has that pending felony charge. It's not going to get resolved anytime soon. Part of what you'll hear from Mr. Wickstrom, in addition to the underlying misjudgment that led to the shooting, is that we have an officer that at no time in the foreseeable future is even going to be allowed to come back. So he's going to be dealing with a criminal charge, even if he's acquitted. It's going to at least months, if not over a year, before we even get to that point. And that supports also the basis for discharge. And then finally, what you'll hear through the testimony of the decision maker here is Officer Coel can't be a police officer in Punta Gorda. It's a smaller community. As a law enforcement officer, your credibility, integrity, and judgment is absolutely essential to your daily responsibilities. And even if he's acquitted of the criminal charge, Officer Coel will not have those resources if you were to reinstate him. For those reasons, you'll hear Mr. Wickstrom indicate to you that he does not think it's a wise move to reinstate him, or even reinstate him pending the result of the criminal conviction, because it's not going to change. He simply can't be an effective officer. Thank you.
PBA would waive its opening.
Okay. Our first witness would be Tom Lewis via his statement. I would like to make it clear we're introducing his whole transcript.
Did you do anything to try and secure Tom Lewis being here live? I mean, in person.
We did not, because of our conversations earlier about using the statements, and candidly, the only reason for the chief's statement is really just he gives a good synopsis of what the Citizen Academy is, what was happening that night. At the time, the statement to FDLE was that very same night or very early in the morning the next morning, so he didn't have all of the facts as to what had happened. But what we'll do in our brief is summarize each step, a little more than I just did in the opening, of what was occurring on August 9th, and he does that, and he was there at the time. So that's really the only reason I want to make sure that's part of the record. I don't think any of that's really in dispute.
Okay.
After that, I'll call Lieutenant Cochran. I think he's waiting outside. So we'll grab him.
Okay.
Before you call,
Sure.
Lieutenant Cochran, Attorney Brantley and Dee, did you take any measures to secure Tom Lewis here to present live testimony?
No.
I'm going to ask that.
For every witness, understand.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
For every witness, you're going to ask that, Justice.
Yes. For every witness, I'm going to ask that. Standard question.
I understand.
Should I turn this off or keep it going? I'm afraid if I turn it off, the mic.
You might reset. You might want to let it keep going.
Yeah, just keep
It's going.
Terry Cochran, COCHRAN.
Thank you.
Okay.
Everyone's ready, I can put the witness under oath. Raise your right hand to be sworn. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Can you tell us what your position here is with the city?
I'm a lieutenant in the criminal investigations section.
With the police department, I assume?
Punta Gorda Police Department, yes, I'm sorry.
Can you give us the 1-minute overview of your background law enforcement career?
Sure.
Started in 1978 as a reserve officer. In 1981 became a full-time sworn officer with the city of Collierville, which is a suburb of Memphis, Tennessee. Spent 20 years with them. 16 of the 20 I was in investigations or running investigations, one of the two. Left there after 20 years, went to the Memphis International Airport Police Department, where I spent 5 years as an officer, and then moved here, and I have 10 years as of May 7th.
Who was your immediate supervisor?
Here,
Yes.
Captain Woodard.
And for the record, I know the city manager is aware of this, but can you describe the hierarchy within the department?
Yes, we have a chief, we have two captains. Each captain runs a separate division. One is support, which is Captain Ciaschini. The other is operations, which is Captain Woodard. Operations takes care of the day-to-day patrol and investigation functions, and support takes care of dispatch records and fleet maintenance, things like that. So.
You know Officer Lee Coel?
Yes,
What was his position within the department?
he was a K-9 officer.
Do you know who you reported to on a daily basis?
It changed over the period of the 2 years he was there, so I would say at the last month or during this incident, Captain Woodard.
Are you familiar with the Citizens Academy that the police department put on back in August of last year?
Yes.
And if I would ask you to flip over in the book that's lying in front of you to exhibit number 8. Tab 8 there.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen that before?
Yes.
Can you tell us what it is?
Here's an outline of the night's event and how it's broken down into separate individual participations depending on what part they're in. They do a 2-hour, basically a 2-hour-long tour of the department.
And just for the record, can you briefly tell us what is the Citizens Academy?
Citizens Academy is it's put on so that the residents can get an idea of how the city operates. They go from government entity to government entity throughout the city. We put on demonstrations. We give them tours of their facilities, just to give them an idea how their money is spent and see how it operates to their benefit, or sometimes they have suggestions for us on how it could work better.
Were you involved at all in putting this one together on August 9th, 2016?
No, I was not. I was on vacation at the time.
And obviously you know that there was a shooting that night?
Yes.
Were you present at the time?
No.
Did you later report to the department?
Yes.
When did you report? That night?
Within probably 45 minutes of the shooting, I received a call from my corporal, and he said that Captain Woodard had ordered everybody in, and so I responded probably 45 minutes later. I would say somewhere around 7, 8 o'clock.
And what agency ultimately led the investigation into that incident?
FDLE.
Did you have any role in assisting the FDLE?
I was their liaison, and I was providing support for whatever they needed to accomplish their task.
In assisting the FDLE in going through, did you come to learn of the sequence of events that led to the shooting that night?
Yes, that along with watching the video, yes.
Okay. Can you walk us through what occurred that night that led in particular to the shooting?
Okay. It was set for 6 o'clock start time, I think, and people were getting ready, getting set up, getting their areas cleaned up. What you do is you have a PowerPoint that's done as a welcoming. It kind of explains the department and the budgetary situations and things like that. It's at that point that they tell people to check their seats, to get a card that they can participate in certain events, whether it's a shoot, don't shoot, or a taser, or different things like that. They do a tour. It's about 5 minutes per section. After the tour, they go out, they do a static display. A static display is where we show off all our equipment. We have boats and different apparatus that we use. And that translates into everybody getting to participate with those items, either sit in them or, turn them on, do all that stuff. And then normally, like this one, towards the end, we do either the shoot, don't shoot, or the taser demonstrations, or whatever it is for that particular evening. And it looks like on this evening, the shoot, don't shoot was being set up. And then after that, they go back in, they spend 10 or 15 minutes debriefing and kind of getting an idea of how it went, and then that's usually the end of the night.
When we say they, who in this
Citizens.
particular night?
Yeah, we had 30 plus citizens here, and this particular night it was the chamber, which makes it a little bit different than a regular Citizens Academy. This was actually one group that we brought in and provided the same service that we provide for the regular academy, which is, I think people sign up for the regular Citizens Academy. So.
Can you walk us through in particular what the shoot, don't shoot role-playing scenario entails?
Yes, it's actually two separate scenarios. You have the first scenario where a subject is supposedly prowling cars, and the citizen or the participant on the civilian side is the police officer in the situation, and we have officers who are playing the bad guys, either the prowler. That scenario concludes with the citizen having contact with the bad guy police officer. They're supposed to engage him. During that engagement, the officer, whether from his person or somewhere he's hid a firearm, he pulls it out, fires a few shots. The noise is supposed to scare them, show that they weren't paying attention, or they were. Some do very well, but that's the idea, just to give them an idea that any second somebody can pull a weapon. It can change from a citizen contact to a deadly situation. That, once finished, goes into the second scenario. This is two people fighting. Usually it's two officers. They're geared up, they're pushing and shoving. In this particular scenario, the officers are not armed with anything. It's just two guys pushing each other and fighting. Same contact, try to get them separated. Usually during the scenario, one of the officers will break away and start charging at the person, waving his hands or yelling to see what the reaction is. And generally, most citizens shoot the person because they've invaded their space or they're scared, which is the point of the whole thing, is that it's really hard to judge unless you're in that situation as to how you would react or how scared you would be. So, now granted, these are not trained people, these are citizens, but it's just to give them an experience. On this particular night, those were the two scenarios that were set to go.
Who was playing the perpetrator or suspect in the first role-playing scenario on August 9th?
In the first scenario with the car prowler, that was Coel.
Walk us through, if you would, what happened, what went wrong in that particular scenario that led to the death of Miss Knowlton.
Okay, based on the reports that the FDLE submitted and based on the video that I watched, Coel arrived there somewhere around 4:45 that day to get prepared. He produced a stainless steel revolver from his back of his vehicle. At some point, he goes back to the back of the vehicle and the rear and appears to be making a motion like he's loading it. Come to find out later, the FDLE search, that's where these wad cutter rounds were found. So he gets his pistol, tucks it in his waistband. He has contact with multiple officers because we're a long time out from the scenario. When it's time for the scenario, he walks towards the cars, goes into the bay. This is a wash bay next to where these cars are parked. I don't know if I guess to describe it, we have one squad car set up and then we have another car set up beside it. The squad car is faced one way, the other one is pointed towards the building. Coel had positioned this .38 revolver on the front bumper, which is usually placed on the front bumper or the back bumper of a car. So when they walk around it, avoiding the citizen, then they can pick it up and do their thing. This particular situation, he got geared up underneath the thing and was ready. They brought Ms. Knowlton forward. Captain Woodard, Lieutenant Salzman, and the chief were pretty much the people controlling the scenario at that point. Lee goes into his prowling, acting like he's on the phone. He gets to the front of the car, picks up the pistol, fires one shot. That shot ricocheted off the seam of the hood and the passenger side fender. As he's walking around the car, he's firing additional shots. Two next rounds ricochet off the hood, strike Mrs. Knowlton, one in the abdomen and one in the left elbow. Final fourth shot was more of a downward angle and put a hole in the driver's side door, which was later found inside the car. Lee immediately ran towards her, and it took a few minutes, or not a few minutes, but seconds for people to realize that there was actually, because a lot of people thought she was playing along, and then some people thought she was bent over laughing, because that happens a lot. People get surprised, and they're, so it took a few seconds for people to realize that this lady was injured, and at that point, then everybody started scattering for medical help.
And this all took place in the parking lot area behind the police department?
Yes, it is a, if you go out our rear door, there's a weight room that's attached to the wash bay, and this is directly in front of the weight room door there.
Based upon the subsequent investigation, did you learn where Officer Coel obtained the gun?
It is his weapon. It's his personal weapon. There was a box in the car that was marked with his name and with that serial number and fit the make and model of the weapon.
The weapon was not issued by the Punta Gorda Police Department?
No, it was not.
Let me ask you to flip over in the book to tab number 10, Department Heads Exhibit 10. This is a series of photos. Have you seen these before?
I have.
You mentioned earlier in your testimony just a few minutes ago a wad cutter. Can you describe for us what a wad cutter is?
Yes, it's going to be, if you're looking at the first photograph, it's the one that's circled. It's a 38 caliber round of ammunition.
Looking at that first page, walk us through what each of these cartridges are.
Okay. The first one circled is the 38 special wad cutter. The second one, the brass with the recessed, is the 38 special blank. And then the one above that is a 380 blank. The 380 blank is typically used in a blank gun that won't fire a regular round. It will fit a 38, but it's...
The weapon that Officer Coel used that night was capable of firing live ammunition?
Yes, it was a regular firearm.
Walk us through, if you would, what's the next page on Exhibit 10? What is that showing?
These are the blanks that are loosely fit in the box. They're marked 38 special smokeless. You see blank on the front with loud noise. That's the brass casing. That's the one that was in the middle on the page before it. The rounds, the blazer rounds at the bottom are the wad cutters. You can see they're packaged like a normal piece of ammunition, and they're not loose. They're in a rack.
The wad cutters are live ammunition. The other ones are blanks.
Yeah, wad cutters are generally used for target practice. Being in the business as long as I've been there, that's all we used to use when we had wheel guns. Was wad cutters, and they punch a nice hole in it, and they're a little bit cheaper to use.
Are these blazer wad cutter rounds, were they issued by the Punta Gorda Police Department?
No, they were not.
You mentioned the packaging here in this second photo, and you said the blazers were packaged like normal ammunition. What do you mean by that?
Well, obviously, normal ammunition, you don't want to have any accidents or accidental discharges or explosions, and so they're a little bit better packaged and a little bit more stable.
They're sort of individually packaged there, is that?
Individually, yeah, and they are live rounds, so if you get one to discharge, you're going to have a projectile. So.
in your experience in dealing with ammunition, is this typically how live ammunition comes packaged?
Typically, I mean, you will have some people that put them in bags, but typically you'll get if it's a manufactured product and you're buying it for our business, then you're going to have it packaged like the first one there.
What about the other box there, the Winchester rounds?
Yeah, the blanks. That's typical packaging of a blank. There's no projectile. Obviously, you can still have a discharge, but it's not as serious as if you had a projectile on the end of it. And I think if I don't know if he had the 380 box. If it's in here, the 380 box that he had, partial box, it was similar. It was loose rounds inside a box. So.
Are these pictures of the boxes of ammunition that were taken out of Officer Cole's vehicle that night?
Yes, sir.
Looking at the next picture, the third picture, that's the blank rounds, correct? The box?
Yes.
Is there any labeling on the box that would indicate that it was not live ammunition?
But it says blank. So.
What about on the last two pictures, the blazer rounds? Are there anything that you would look to on the box that would indicate that they're not blanks?
Well, it doesn't say blank anywhere on the box. And then when you get to the flap that you open to get into the box, you'll see it's labeled as a 38 Special 148 grain round. The WC at the end of that is for wad cutter.
What's 148 grain? What does that reference?
That's the weight of the bullet. If you got grain, you can't have if it's a round and it says it has grains and it has a projectile attached to it, because that's the weight of the lead bullet. So
a blank round would not have.
No, you won't have a grain marking on it because it doesn't have a projectile.
If you would look over at tab number 9, Department Head Exhibit 9 in the book in front of you.
Yeah.
Can you just identify what this is?
This is one of our incident reports, and it's actually the incident report for this particular event. It's an assisting other agency. In other words, we were assisting FDLE in there.
There's some information, obviously, in narrative in here. Did you play a role in putting this together?
Yes, if it has my name attached to it as the investigator, then that would be my narrative. And then I'd probably approve the other narratives of my detectives. So.
I think you may have mentioned it, just to be clear on the record, on the night of August 9th, which of the rounds was Officer Cole using in his revolver during the role-playing exercise?
He was using the blazer wad cutters that night.
Did you subsequently become aware that he had used those wad cutters previously, thinking that they were blank rounds?
Yes, from the FDLE report.
Can you describe what you learned in that regard?
Apparently, the Charlotte County Sheriff's Department had a demonstration at their range, which is off Airport Road, and he participated in that as a bad guy as well. There was a couple of scenarios where he discharged the same firearm and apparently the same wad cutter ammunition.
Now, you're not the person that made the decision to discharge Officer Cole, right?
No.
Did you, based upon what you learned through the investigations, did you meet with Mr. Wickstrom and relay that information to him?
I did.
In your experience as a law enforcement officer, knowing the sequence of events that occurred on August 9th, do you think Officer Cole did anything wrong?
Yeah.
What?
He killed a 73-year-old lady during a training exercise because he didn't read the box of ammo that he was using for the exercise.
if he were to be reinstated as an officer here in Punta Gorda, you think he would be an effective officer?
No, I don't think you'd be an effective officer here or anywhere else.
Why not?
That's personal.
Why not?
Well, the police officer in this city, we're a close-knit community, we're a close-knit group of individuals that are looked upon with high esteem and much trust, and I don't think you'll ever have that trust with Lee Collier in this community. Yeah.
That's all I have.
Lieutenant, you said prior to coming to Punta Gorda you worked in Tennessee?
Yes.
And in your capacity in that, and you were there for 20 plus years? 25 years. During your time with that department, did you ever participate in any Citizens Academy things such as the one that was put on August 9th? No, your department never did those type of...
No, those became popular a little bit, not that far back. So.
Were there ever any demonstrations put on for citizens during your time with the department in which there were anything similar to the shoot, don't shoot scenarios that were put on for demonstration purposes, whether they involved the citizens or not?
No.
So the first time you've been involved in those have been with Punta Gorda?
Yes. With citizens.
Okay. You talked about the structure of the department with the chief and 2 captains.
Yes.
There's no assistant chief?
No.
And what is the rank structure from the chief down?
Chief, 2 captains, then just lieutenants, and then you have corporals below the lieutenants, and then you have your regular officers or detectives.
Okay, so no sergeant and no majors or anything between, or assistant chief or deputy chief, anything like that?
No, lieutenants used to be sergeants, and they were reclassed a few years back, and then corporals are not a promotion, but a position. So that just happened in the last 5 or 6 years.
What is you talked about that as a promotion. What is the importance of that chain of command? What's the importance? How does that rank come into play? What does that mean?
The importance?
Yeah, in terms of...
Well, it's a paramilitary organization, so you have control. That's what it's basically for, is to manage the control. So you have your officers who report basically to a lieutenant. If the only way a corporal comes into play is if the lieutenant is off that day, then the corporal on that squad would take his place. So he's responsible for his 4 or 5 guys. Okay, there's 4 patrol lieutenants. Those 4 patrol lieutenants report to the captain. He's responsible for those lieutenants and the men under him. And as it goes up, then the chief is responsible for everybody. So.
All right. So this is a supervisory chain of command. Each rank being the next level of supervisor.
Yes.
Okay. And in terms of when we talk about chain of command with regard to communications, generally communications go through the chain of command?
Should. But in our organization, you have an open door policy, so you can jump over.
What about for operations, operational decisions? Are those generally willy-nilly, or do they follow the chain of command?
They would follow the chain of command.
And so in terms of the officers and the people that were involved on the night of August 9th, from a rank standpoint, it's fair to say that Officer Coel was the lowest ranking person at that scenario, correct?
It would be Officer Coel and the other officer for the next scenario. There's 2 officers involved that night, but only 1 in this particular incident. So if you're talking about the shoot, don't shoot.
Yeah.
The car
well, or for the whole Citizens Academy.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you said that Officer Coel, his supervisor at the time of this incident, was Captain Woodard.
Yes.
So he didn't have a lieutenant that he reported to?
At that particular time, he reported directly to he was reporting directly to Lieutenant Heck earlier in the year, and then he reported to Captain Woodard. It's probably a month before this incident they changed over. And that was for purposes of equipment and scheduling of training and things like that. So when he's on the road, Lee Kohler was under the command of a lieutenant who was running that squad. But as far as for his equipment, training, needs, and everything like that, he went to his individual supervisor, and it's always been somebody else other than the road lieutenant.
In his capacity as an officer, would he have had the responsibility to set up or organize that Citizens Academy event?
No.
Would he have had a responsibility to set up or organize the shoot, don't shoot scenario?
He would be responsible for whatever he was a part of, absolutely. As far as determining who was going to be the bad guy that day or who was going to do what, no, he wouldn't be the one to do that. So.
You would describe the two scenarios. One was the prowling car, which is the one I think that came into play here. There was another one that would have been two people fighting. Is there safety equipment that's normally used in the fighting thing, in the fighting scenario?
They don munitions gear, which is usually a vest, a helmet with a mask, and that's pretty much it. It's just a protection because the citizen has a munitions weapon, which fires a soap round. Are you familiar with munitions?
Yes.
Okay. So it fires a soap round, and that can cause an injury, put an eye out. If it hits a jugular or something, it could kill you. So they're protected from the munitions round that could come their way.
Do you know when Lee Cole arrived at the police department to participate in this? Do you know whether that equipment had been provided, had been organized? Was it out and available for the scenarios?
I think I'm getting this from my FDLE review, and I think at the time that the equipment was not there and somebody had to go retrieve it.
Do you recall if that somebody was Officer Cole?
I do not think so. I think it was either Lieutenant Salzman or Captain Woodard, one of the two. I can't remember, but if you want me to look at the statements, I can do that.
You want me to interject? I think it was Captain Woodard.
Well, there are actually two.
Oh.
That equipment is stored off-site, so it would have to be somebody with a key to get into the off-site.
All right, I'm going to direct you first in our book, which is under tab 6 is the sworn statement. First is Captain Woodard. And if you'll just read to yourself the highlighted language there on page, let me get the page number for them. 731 under tab 9.
Okay, it's Captain Woodard.
Okay, and who was
That's Woodard's statement?
Right.
Okay.
And who does it indicate came to him seeking that safety equipment?
Lee Cole.
Okay. And then I'm going to direct you to that other one was tab 6. This is tab 9. Page 1396 and into 97, if you just read to yourself. This is the sworn statement of Lieutenant David Lipker.
Okay.
So, again, who does that indicate was seeking safety equipment from Lieutenant Lipker?
Lee Cole.
You talked about the FDLE report. You have, as the liaison, you've seen the final end report.
Yes.
Have you had an opportunity to read through and review all of the detailed sworn statements that were referenced and summarized in that report?
Most of them.
Are you familiar with the during these role play shoot don't shoot scenarios and the use of these simulated weapons? Are you familiar with the use or assignment of a safety officer?
Yes.
What's a safety officer's role?
Safety officer's role is to, just what it says, provide a safe environment for the exercise to occur without anybody being injured or killed. The safety officer is usually a person that's assigned, usually it's the instructor or one of the secondary instructors. For a simulations exercise, I'll just go through the whole thing. Our simulations training, we would have an area roped off. Before you can enter the area, you're patted down, you check for any additional weapons. There's absolutely no live fire weapons allowed, there's no ammunition allowed, there's no knives allowed. Nothing that can injure or harm somebody is allowed because it's a training exercise, and the only thing that should be in there are these simulations weapons and the gear that you just described, the pads and the helmet, things like that. So they check, but usually it's a step further, and that's once you're checked by him, then everybody else checks everybody too as a secondary check. Everybody is typically a safety officer. Any range thing, everybody's a safety officer, but this designated person, that's his job to make sure all this is done. If he sees something that's out of play or not supposed to happen during the scenario itself, if somebody's doing something that is not right, yell stop, call it, explain that what the problem is, and that could be your throat protector got turned around or something during the struggle, and you're vulnerable at that time, anything like that. So that's basically his role, and that's how we would use one. I would say it's a standard in the industry. Most people, I think, we use Simunitions, FX Simunitions, which is a brand and a type, and so that's the extent of a safety officer.
And would the safety officer also have the responsibility to load the simulation weapon, check it, load it, make sure that it's loaded before it's given to the citizen?
Yes, he would, but there would also be another officer to verify what he's doing. So.
Okay. On the night of August 9th, was a safety officer assigned during this scenario?
I cannot find one in the report.
Should there have been one?
Yes.
Whose responsibility would it have been to assign a safety officer?
I would say whoever was controlling the scenario, so that would be their responsibility. But in the same respect, everybody that's involved in this has done simulations multiple times, so if they weren't checked, somebody should have, being everybody's a safety officer, somebody should have said, whoa, something's going on. We're not following protocol.
Well, we've established that the pads and that safety equipment had not been provided at the time Lee Coel arrived to participate.
And that's what I'm talking about.
Right.
And Lee said, hey, wait a minute, we don't have the equipment.
Should Lee have been using one of the simulation guns?
He certainly shouldn't have been using a live fire gun.
Do you recall any discussion in the past in the Citizen Academy about the fact that the simulation guns were not loud enough and didn't create enough of an impact, and there was a desire to use blanks?
I was not aware of that until I read the FDL report.
But you did, that is contained in the body of the report?
It is, yes.
Yeah. Would it have been Lee Cole's responsibility to assign a safety officer to this scenario as an officer?
No, I don't think it would be his responsibility, but if it wasn't occurring, then he probably should have said something. There should have been a lot of people said something then.
Lee Coel, I believe you testified, was a K-9 officer, is that correct?
Yes.
Are you aware that it's common for the K-9 officers to have a blank fire weapon to use in training of the dogs?
Yeah, I was aware of it. I really didn't know the specs or anything like that. I always assumed they were blank guns.
you talked about the gun that he used the night of the event. Are you aware that that gun had been used by the department in other citizens academies?
No, it was not.
Do you recall that from the FDLE report?
I do not recall them talking about that particular gun. I do remember somebody saying something about blanks. So.
I'm going to turn you to tab 10, page 1317. This is the sworn statement of Lieutenant Christopher Salzman. I'm going to ask you to read there at the top to yourself and refresh your recollection.
Yeah, from this I can't tell if he actually knows that that was used prior or not. He says, well, apparently yes, and then he says that was unbeknownst to me. So I guess what I'm saying is I read things like that were blanks. This is what I know. We don't own a blank gun, the department. So I don't know what he's basing this on. I'm not arguing the fact.
Do you recall from the FDLE report some testimony about a requisition at one point being put in to buy a specific gun, and the department wanted to push it off to another budget year after pricing it locally?
I did not read that. Do you have that?
Yeah, it's in here. I don't want to.
I read the part where I know we issued him blanks in February of that year. So.
And
whose statement was that we were putting it on?
I don't recall, but there was it might have been Lieutenant Hex. I have to go back and look. There was a discussion about a requisition and after being pushed off to another budget year, and him being told if you wanted to buy one, they'd reimburse him.
I do not remember.
Okay. Nonetheless, you are aware that the blanks that he was provided were provided by Lieutenant Katie Heck. Is that correct?
Are we talking the blanks?
The blazer rounds.
Yes.
And you're aware from the FDLE report that they were represented to him as being blanks?
Yes.
Okay. And at the time they were provided to him, Lieutenant Katie Heck was his supervisor, correct?
Yes.
You had mentioned something about during the scenario where the bullets that came out, projectiles that came out of that Officer Cole's weapon, that some of them had ricocheted, correct?
3.
Okay. So there was one that lodged in the driver's door of the parked vehicle and 3 ricocheted off the hood.
Yes.
Does that indicate to you that Officer Cole was not pointing the weapon directly at Ms. Knowlton?
No, it doesn't indicate. It indicates that he had a downward angle, but it was still in her general vicinity. Typically, if you're going to use a blank gun during a scenario, and you're not wanting to impact the person with the ammunition's round, you should fire probably at the ground. That would be the best case scenario. I think if you read through those Charlotte County statements, the deputies talk about they shoot at the ground and point it down to keep anybody, because a blank can hurt you too. A blank can put an eye out. A blank can kill you if it's close enough.
Well, look.
I don't think he was pointing center mass, if that's what you're asking.
Well, look under the notebook you've got there under tab 11. The Human Resources Director has provided us a summary here of Officer Cole's weapons training. Mm-hmm. Would you say that he was a reasonable marksman?
I can say he's had the training. I don't know what his marks were as a marksman.
He was standing in fairly close proximity to Mrs. Knowlton during the scenario, correct?
Just across the hood, yes.
Okay. So, fair to say, for him to strike the hood and not strike her, he's either a really, really bad shot or he was intentionally pointing the gun away from her.
And like I said, I don't think he was pointing center mass on her, but
Okay.
in a true training situation, he should have been pointing at the ground.
Well, but if he's standing that close to the car and he's pointing down, that is the hood of the car.
No. If he was pointing down, he'd have been closer to his feet.
Is it working? Running? Looks like it's running to me. Okay. All yours.
Before I call the next witness, I would like to, earlier I indicated that we didn't need, my Exhibit 13 was an FDLE report because it's redundant of their exhibit. But I'm looking through your guys's, I don't see that you included the supplements that were done after it went to the state attorney's office. So I'm going to...
I printed everything in that was sent to me.
We probably don't have this up.
We probably might not have them. I printed you the entire document that was sent to me. Other than there was a disc of photos, I think, that we didn't print.
Well, I'm gonna want to admit that in my Exhibit 13, some of it's redundant of yours, but there are what it was, and you'll have it in your book in front of you. In 13 is there were, after FDLE turned the report over to the state attorney's office, they asked them to go back and interview some of the sheriff's department personnel. So there's 4 or 5 supplements of sheriff department interviews.
Do you know where that starts?
If you look, each summary has a serial number at the bottom.
Yes.
I want to say it's after there's an autopsy report, which is part of the original report, and then the very next one starts with 67. And I printed everything double-sided, so it's on
67 and then 72 is the next one.
right.
Okay.
And I did not include, as you can see, it jumped from 67 to 72. So there are some things left out. I'm happy if we want to introduce it all. What was left out are things like there was a fingerprint report. There, things of that nature where I included the summary, but not not necessarily all the backup data that I didn't think was that relevant. But if you want it all, I'm happy to introduce it all.
Is it not, are those things not in ours?
I just flipped to the end, and yours stopped at the autopsy report. Unless it's out of order, I can't say I went through the whole thing. But I do know that when FDLE transmitted the initial report,
I heard 67.
it went up to the autopsy report, which is what it looks like you guys have. And then apparently, some months later, they added some more interviews. I'm assuming at the direction of the state attorney, although I don't have any personal knowledge of it.
Looks like we have 67 and 68 and it does stop. We do not have 73 forward.
In the state attorney's information that was provided to me, it was in a separate folder. So I don't know what you guys received, but it wasn't included in the same document as what you have. It was separated in a different subfolder.
Okay, I don't have any objection to admitting the additional.
Okay.
Then I'd call Mr. Wickstrom.
So raise your right hand to be sworn, please. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you will give in this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, tell us who you are, what you do for the city.
My name is Phil Wickstrom, Philip Wickstrom. I'm the Human Resources Manager for the city. Among other duties, I also serve as the Risk Manager, and I do some ADA type related things, but my primary job is Human Resources Management.
You were the individual who made the discharge decision as pertains to Mr. Coel, Officer Coel?
Yes.
How did you get involved with making that decision?
How far back do you want to go in terms of? I heard.
Why wasn't it the police chief that made the decision?
Okay. The police chief, if you reference the contract, the police chief is generally assigned to carry out these duties that I was tasked with doing. In this particular case, however, the police chief was at the event and was an integral part of that event. And secondly, he had just been charged by the state's attorney's office, and it was felt by counsel and that it would be inappropriate for him to be tasked with making a decision in such a case. So I was delegated the responsibility by the city manager.
Did you have any role in the Citizens Academy on August 9th?
Didn't even know it was happening.
Okay. So I assume you were not there?
Absolutely not.
Now you know who Officer Coel is, right?
Yes.
For the record, did you have any role in the investigation of the August 9th incident, whether by FDLE or
No.
the Punta Gorda Police Department?
No.
Can I clarify something?
Sure.
When you use the term council, you do not mean city council.
No, I'm talking about my labor attorney counsel.
Oh, okay.
Talking
So,
about me, Brian Koji.
Brian Koji, yes.
Okay.
COUNSEL.
Flip over in the book in front of you to tab number 7, if you would. You've seen this before?
Yes.
Can you tell us what it is?
It's the charges against Lee Cole for manslaughter with a firearm, first-degree felony, by the state's attorney's office.
When the city received this charge, did you initiate consideration of discipline against Officer Coel?
Yes.
Flip over, if you would, to tab 2 in the book in front of you. Tell us what that is, if you wouldn't mind.
Under Florida statutes, the Police Bill of Rights, we are required to provide an officer against whom we are considering serious discipline a pre-disciplinary action or a notice of potential disciplinary action. This is our notice to him that we were considering disciplinary action.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
When was that provided to him?
The date of this was February 22nd. I believe that we sent it by email to his attorney, and we moved forward from there.
What were the grounds that you were considering taking disciplinary action against him?
They're specified in numbers 1 and 2. First of all, on August 9, 2016, you were involved in an incident in which a citizen, Mary Knowlton, was shot and killed by you during a role-playing exercise. Your conduct during that exercise in failing to take appropriate and reasonable steps to ensure the safety of Mary Knowlton, and in failing to ensure that no live ammunition was used during the exercise would, if true, constitute sufficient cause for disciplinary action up to and including potential discharge.
You're reading from the pre-disciplinary notice, that's Exhibit 2?
Yes, and then finally, as a consequence of the August 9th action, the state's attorney's office filed a felony criminal charge against him for culpable criminal negligence.
We talked a little bit about the process. After you issued him this notice of pre-disciplinary notice, what happened next?
We set a date to meet.
Who's we?
You and I worked with Attorney D. At no time in that period did I speak directly to Mr. Coel. I spoke through Mr. D. We set up a meeting which was in the other conference room, and it was we met at the time specified in the pre-disciplinary letter. And we went through that process, took probably about 45 minutes.
And just for the record, Attorney David D. was representative for Mr. Coel.
Yes.
And a pre-disciplinary conference was held with the four of us.
Yes, you and me and David D. and Lee Coel.
And what occurred during the pre-disciplinary conference? Briefly.
Basically, we explained to him the action that we were considering to take. Mr. D. early in the session said that there was that they did not dispute the facts of the case, that the facts were as they were. We talked through various matters, one of which was, again, very specifically that we were considering discipline up to and including discharge.
Are you familiar with the disciplinary procedure, the Appendix C, I think we referred to it, that
Yes.
the city uses for police officers?
Yes.
Flip, if you would, over to Exhibit 3 in the department head exhibit book in front of you.
Okay.
Is that the disciplinary procedure that pertains to rank and file police officers in the city here?
Yes.
And let me jump to the conclusion here. You ultimately decided to discharge Officer Coel, right?
Yes.
Can you explain to the city manager why you reached that decision?
Well, it all boils down to, there are a couple of provisions within the Group 2 offenses which are, and those are offenses which could lead to termination immediately without prior steps. But bottom line is that Lee Coel shot and killed a 73-year-old woman in a training exercise, in basically a show. If you want to address specific issues related to our Group 2 offenses, and by the way, there is language elsewhere in this that basically says that there's not that some things are serious enough to go straight to Group 2. But one would be number 17, and that's on page 33 of Exhibit 3. On or off the job conduct which adversely affects the ability of the employee to perform his duties and or adversely affects the efficient operation of the city government or any department, division, or area of city government. This matter that we are considering today, if it doesn't fall under this, then nothing ever will. He cannot perform, we hire police officers and public safety officials, but police officers specifically, to protect us. And we also impute to them a level of trust which is abnormal for other city employees. We equip them with weapons which can kill. We equip them with other means and methods. We train them. But the bottom line is we equip them with trust. We say to them, we trust you to do the right thing. We trust you to make good judgments. Every time you pull somebody over, you're making a judgment. And we are trusting you to make that judgment. And this was on the job. It has adversely affected his ability to do his job. It affects the efficient operations of the city in the sense that we have spent an inordinate amount of time investigating and following through because of what he did. If you want to get really technical, on page 31, Group 2 offenses, excessive tardiness or absenteeism regardless of the reason. He has been absent since August 10th of 2016. Much of that time was on paid leave. Most recently has been unpaid because he's been terminated. But he can't do the job because he's been charged with felony. He can't do the job because what he did was so onerous that people don't trust him, whether it's the public or his own coworkers.
Well, let me ask you this. Officer Coel, in his appeal, obviously he's seeking to get his job back. Do you think he could be an effective officer here with Punta Gorda?
No.
Why not?
Number one, I don't believe in this belief, and since we are allowed to bring in some, I would say hearsay, whatever you want, I've spoken with officers and who have said there is no way he can come back and work for this department again. No way. I've talked to people in the community, some of whom have been very interested and avid participants, who have basically said that there's no way this guy could ever be a police officer again. And so when I put that together, in conjunction with the fact that he's carrying a charge, which who knows how long the disposition of that will be, no, he cannot be a police officer again. Not in this department. He might be able to in some other place. I can't, that would be a judgment I can't make. But I know in this city and in this department that there's no way he can do it. And in HR speak, he cannot carry out the essential functions of the job.
All right, that's all I have. Thank you.
There was some discussion earlier about the rank structure of Punta Gorda Police Department. What's your understanding of the chain of command within the police department? How does that work?
Chief is at the top. He's, for lack of a better way of putting it, the chief executive officer of the police department. Anything that happens in the police department is his. He owns it. He has two captains that are direct reports in terms of they manage divisions within. One is in charge of administrative services and what I would call almost civilian-related services, and then the other is in charge of actual road operations, investigations, and those kind of things. There are possibly a couple who have dotted line connections to the chief directly. One would probably be the accreditation manager, although she reports directly, I believe, to the police captain in charge of operations. But she has a lot of interaction with him, and I believe that the training officer has a dotted line connection directly to the chief as well.
So, is it fair to say that as someone rises in the ranks, their level of responsibility grows?
Absolutely, that's the expectation. Yes.
And with regard to, let's first talk about communications. From an employee standpoint, in the paramilitary structure of the police department, are communications supposed to flow generally through the chain of command?
Yes.
And operationally, at an emergency scene or otherwise, does the chain of command come into play with regard to giving orders and carrying out orders?
It really depends on the level of crisis. If it was a crisis that demanded immediate action and the chief happened to be the person there, then everyone would defer to him. However, if there's time to process things through a chain of command, they would do that. But my experience is on routine matters, everything goes through the chain of command.
So would you consider the Citizens Academy and the setting up the Citizens Academy to be a routine matter that would be set up and controlled through the chain of command?
Yes.
Okay. What rank did Lee Coel hold on August 9th?
I believe he was a police officer. I don't believe he was a corporal.
Okay, and is police officer considered a command level rank?
No.
Okay. As a police officer, you're familiar with the job descriptions for each of these classifications?
Yes, I've written most of them.
Did Lee Coel's job responsibilities as a police officer include responsibility for implementing departmental policies?
Every employee, in my mind, if you're asking, do I have something in writing that says that? First of all, they are judged almost daily against the accreditation standards. So that would be implementation of a police policy. But beyond that, we are charged in our personnel rules and regulations and as employees of the city with following the policies and rules and regulations of not only our city, but also the departments and divisions within which they operate.
You misunderstood my question.
Okay.
I understand everyone has to follow them. I'm talking about creating or implementing new policies.
No.
Okay. How about administrative guidelines? As a police officer, would he be drafting or putting out new administrative guidelines to the department? Okay. As a human resources director, you have an understanding of what constitutes insubordination?
Yes.
And what would insubordination be?
Willful failure to follow the direct order of a supervisor.
Okay, so if Lee Cole, as a police officer, was given a directive or instructed to do something by a superior officer and he did not do it, willfully did not do it, that would be insubordination, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. I want you to turn in this book to Exhibit 2.
Can I take it?
Yeah. And it might be close to there. I believe it's page 32.
Yep, got it.
Okay. Is that a list of the, what is that, Group 2 offenses?
Yes, this is a list of Group 2 offenses.
Okay, and are Group 2 offenses more severe than Group 1 offenses?
Absolutely.
And is insubordination listed among the Group 2 offenses?
Item number 8.
Okay, so insubordination, failure to abide by a directive of a superior officer would be an offense for which an officer could receive discipline up to including termination on a first offense, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And go back to the Group 1 offenses and look at number 7 on page 30. That talks about violation of a safety procedure.
Yes.
So that's a Group 1. So that's viewed in context as a lesser degree of violation than. Okay. Turn, if you wanted, to Exhibit 1 for a minute. I want to ask you about these letters. You drafted both letters, the pre-termination and then the decision to terminate letters, February 22nd and whatever the date was on the other one, correct?
Yes.
And you cited, and I believe you just mentioned earlier, that the reasons you provided in the first letter was that the reasons for the termination was that Officer Cole failed to take appropriate and reasonable steps to ensure the safety of Mary Knowlton, and that he failed to ensure that there was no live ammunition was used during the demonstration.
Correct.
And then secondarily was the issue of the criminal charges filed by the state attorney's office, correct?
Okay. Yes.
That would make him, if he's found guilty, make him unable to return.
Okay.
That is still pending, correct? We don't know where that criminal charge is.
We have no idea.
Okay. So we don't know whether number 2 in the long term is going to hold water, but so really what we're taking action on now has to do with the first part of that, failing to take appropriate reasonable steps, correct?
I would disagree with your assessment, but I will accept it on its face value.
Okay, well you mentioned earlier that one of the problems is that you mentioned that Officer Cole is also guilty of excessive absenteeism because he's been off on administrative leave.
Well, yes, he could. While all of this was going on, and especially after the charges were filed, there's no way that he could serve as an acting police officer.
Was any other city employee criminally charged as a result of the August 9th, 2016 incident?
Not to my knowledge. Yes, I take that back. The police chief was charged with a misdemeanor.
Okay, and is he back at work?
No.
So he's been off since August 10th as well?
No. He was only relieved of his duties as of the moment that we received the notice from the state's attorney's office.
So is it fair to say that the chief is also guilty of excessive absenteeism right now because he's off on paid administrative leave?
Not any more than Officer Cole was while he was on paid administrative leave.
But in terms of the specific Group 2 offenses that you cited, you didn't cite those in either of those letters, correct? Your final letter just referenced back to for the reasons stated in your February 22nd.
You are correct.
Right. What information did you rely on or consider prior to issuing the February 22nd letter? What did you review or consider?
It's February 20. You talking about the one that
Notifying
a potential disciplinary action?
Up to and including termination.
It was the notice by the state's attorney's office that he had been charged with a felony.
And that was all that you considered?
Yes.
Had you at that time seen the FDLE report?
No, I had not.
At the time of the final letter, whatever the date is on that final letter, March 9th, had you had an opportunity to review the full FDLE report?
No.
Prior to making the decision of either February 22nd or March 9th, did you have an opportunity to review Officer Cole's personnel file?
I have reviewed Officer Cole's personnel file several times.
Prior to making that decision?
Yes.
Did that personnel file contain performance evaluations completed at the police department?
Yes.
And how were his scores on his personnel performance evaluations?
Generally acceptable.
Since making the determination after March 9th, have you had a chance to review the report that was produced for the city manager by former police chief Arnold Gibbs?
I have not reviewed it, no.
So you're not familiar with its conclusions?
No.
So essentially the February 22nd and March 9th letters arose, what was considered before those were drafted were the state attorney's office decision to charge.
Yes.
And his personnel file.
His personnel file entered into the equation only in the sense that there had been incidents where his judgment came into question. But this issue, what he was fired for, it doesn't matter how clean that record would have been, I would have terminated that officer.
Had he been previously disciplined by the city?
He has various letters of counseling. He'd been involved in a vehicle incident where his equipment was damaged. Of course, there was another incident which was highly publicized, which is part of his personnel record. But again, I took the action that I took based on what I've specified in this letter. He shot an innocent 73-year-old woman in a training scenario.
Are you aware that both the FDLE report and the report issued by Chief Arnold Gibbs resulted in different conclusions with regard to the events that led to Miss Knowlton's death?
When you say, in my mind, there's only one conclusion.
So regardless of what those say, you've got that conclusion, you're sticking with it. There was nothing else that occurred that contributed or resulted in the events that led to her death.
Here's the way I see it, and sometimes I'm too simplistic, okay? This is an individual that was certified as a law enforcement officer in the state of Florida. This is an individual with whom we have placed a great deal of trust. This is an individual that should be able to recognize the difference between live ammunition and non-live ammunition. And we can parse that whole thing if you wish, but the reality is that I grew up with a dad who was a hunter, okay? And one of the first things he ever told me, and I never owned a gun myself up until I bought a .22 rifle, and my wife made me sell it the next day. And the one thing he told me, he said, never ever point a gun at or toward somebody unless you intend to shoot it. And he said, I don't care if it's a pellet gun or a BB gun, or he had a .30-06 at that time. And that stuck in my head. Now we're talking about an officer who had experience, 2 years at our agency, been through however long the academy is, experience at another agency. You have, I cannot in any way, shape, or form absolve him of what he did. There is no way that an experienced officer, and in my mind, you're shooting a weapon. Number one, it's a weapon that's capable of shooting live rounds, the real deal. This isn't a cap gun. My common sense tells me that the very worst, I'm just going to point at the ground, because the issue is the loud noise, is everything that I've heard. Oh, we want a loud noise. Okay. But this action, in and of itself, you take away any previous issues, you take away anything else. The bottom line is he shot and killed Mary Knowlton.
Turn, if you would, in that book in front of you to Exhibit 10.
Okay.
Page 1314. Which book are we on? We're in the
big
our
book.
Our book.
PBA.
The big book.
PBA's exhibit book.
13.
Exhibit 10, page 1314.
Okay.
This is the sworn statement of Lieutenant Christopher Salzman.
Okay. Got it?
Read the highlighted language to yourself.
Okay.
You see that Lieutenant Salzman is acknowledging that he was unable to differentiate the live rounds from the blank rounds by looking at them?
According to Salzman, he says no, because they look exactly the same.
Right.
Okay.
Are you aware that the FDLE's conclusion with regard to the events that led to the death of Mrs. Knowlton said that the conclusion was that Officer Cole's and others' inability to differentiate blank rounds from live ammunition was the resulted in her death?
I was unaware that they had drawn that conclusion.
Turn, if you would, under tab 3.
Whoa. Okay. Page.
In the very front, it's about 6 pages back. There's page 4 of 4 that has a signature on it, dated 13 October 2016.
Okay.
If you would read, please, under the conclusion, read into the record.
Conclusion. There is no evidence that Officer Cole intended to use lethal ammunition while participating in the role-play scenario with Mary Knowlton on August 9, 2016. Furthermore, it is apparent that Officer Cole's and others' inability to differentiate between blank firing cartridges and a .38 caliber HBWC ammunition resulted in Mary Knowlton's death.
Does that change your viewpoint with regard to the responsibility for Mrs. Knowlton's death?
No. He pulled the trigger.
Okay. As a result of the investigation, did you recommend discipline for any other members of the police department?
No, there has been no investigation other than this, and at this point in time, I have not taken any additional action.
Okay, with regard to Chief Lewis, he was charged by the State Attorney's Office as well, correct?
That is correct.
Has he been recommended, as of the date of this hearing, has he been recommended for any discipline whatsoever?
No.
How about for Captain Jeffrey Woodard?
No.
Captain Jason Clashini?
Cischini? No.
For Lieutenant Katie Heck?
No.
For Lieutenant Christopher Salzman?
No.
And you, I believe you testified you have not reviewed or read the report produced for the city manager by Police Chief Arnold Gibbs?
No, I have not.
And you're not familiar with its conclusions?
Generally, no. Anything that it has been discussed, and I've heard that his conclusions were that there were safeguards that were overlooked or not followed. But that's all that I know.
Turn, if you would, in that book to tab 12. You'll see about 2, 3, 4, 5 pages back. In the middle of the page is the word conclusion.
Yep.
If you would read the highlighted language, you can read the whole thing if you'd like, that conclusion through the next page.
Okay. All right.
Does reading this change your viewpoint at all?
No.
Since August 9th, has the City of Punta Gorda Police Department drafted new policies or updated existing policies regarding police department citizen demonstrations?
Yes.
Why?
I would, in response to this event.
Was there something lacking in the previous versions?
Without,
I'm going to object his lack of personal knowledge as to why or what might have been lacking with the prior department.
He was aware that they've been
Policies.
updated.
I was aware they've been updated because I've
Doesn't
been
mean
told
you
they've
know
been
why.
updated.
Others
And
were-
that it was.
Hold on.
I'm sorry.
I'm objecting because he knows they've been updated. My objection is he doesn't necessarily know what was lacking in the prior policies, unless he says that.
That is his assessment. I will say it back to you. I was unaware of the details of the policies that existed prior to this event, and I'm unaware of all of the changes that have been made since then. What I do know, and I do have a general outline of some changes that have been implemented, and that was forwarded to me by Tom Lewis, because our insurance company was asking, have we taken action to make sure this doesn't happen again?
The objection is noted, but that's all it is. It's just noted.
You mentioned that you had, since this occurred, you have talked to members of the police department who have said that they would be, I don't know if you said they'd be unwilling to work with Officer Coel, or that they believed he should not return to work. Is that correct?
Yes.
Who did you speak to?
Am I required to say? Okay. Chris Salzman, Terry Cochran, Bonnie Buckaloo, Becky Grimm, and at that time Becky Grimm was still a police officer. Those are the only ones that readily come to mind. There may have been others, but I know those 4 specifically because I remember where the conversations took place and under what circumstances. Larry Schrader.
You said you spoke to members of the community who said also that they don't believe that Officer Coel could return to duty here.
Yes.
Who did you speak to in the community?
Well, there's a couple gentlemen that availed themselves of the opportunity to be interested in our affairs. They made it abundantly clear that Lee Coel not only shouldn't be an officer, he shouldn't be alive.
Yeah, who were they?
One's name is Ian McGuire, and the other one, I don't know his name. There are others. To be specific, it's been more of a, I don't deal with the public that often. An instructor that I work with, his name is Charlie Brox. He has said basically the same thing. Obviously, there have probably been others, but those are the only ones that really come.
Are these people, Mr. McGuire or this person that you teach with, are those people that have had an opportunity to review the FDLE report?
Probably not.
Have they had an opportunity to review Arnold Gibbs' report?
Probably not.
And to be clear, you've had the opportunity to review both, but haven't reviewed both, correct?
You are correct.
Bless I don't have anything further.
Just a little bit of follow-up. In the little book, the department head exhibits in front of you, flip over to tab 10, please.
Yes.
You were asked some questions by Mr. Brantley about whether or not Lieutenant Salzman indicated in his FDLE statement that he could differentiate between these bullets. If you look on the first picture, those are pictures of the actual ammunition, both the blanks and the live rounds that were used. Do you remember those questions?
Yes.
Do you know whether or not Lieutenant Salzman or any of these others that are referenced in the FDLE report were ever stated that they were shown and couldn't differentiate when they had the boxes of ammunition?
It's not in the FDLE report, Again, I haven't read the FDLE report in detail.
You were asked some questions about what you had and had relied on when you made your decision to discharge Officer Cole, and you indicated that you didn't have and you hadn't reviewed the FDLE report.
Correct.
Set aside what you reviewed in writing, you indicate you had the state attorney's report, charging document, right?
Yes.
You did have a sit down with Lieutenant Cochran,
Correct.
who went through the chain of events with you before you made the decision to discharge Officer Cole, correct?
He also showed me these pictures.
And Lieutenant Cochran indicated to you that he was aware of the FDLE report and was aware of the sequence of events of August 9th, right?
Yes.
You relied on that information relayed to you by Lieutenant Cochran.
Yes.
Have you been tasked by anybody at the city with deciding whether or not anybody else within the chain of command should be subject to potential disciplinary action?
No.
And do you know whether or not the city is considering or investigating others within the chain of command?
Yes.
Are you involved in any way with that?
As of this time, no.
You were shown by Mr. Brantley the Appendix C, Group 1 and 2 offenses. I think Mr. Brantley pointed out that one of the Group 1 offenses was a safety violation.
Correct.
In your mind, are all safety violations the same?
No.
Did you determine that what occurred here with regard to Officer Cole's conduct on August 9th warranted a Group 1 safety violation only?
No.
Lieutenant Katie Heck, what's her employment status with the city as of today?
And undetermined. She has indicated to her chief that she is resigning in early May. She will be working we have been told she will be working for the SO as a civilian.
That's all I have.
Can I have a follow-up question on something that was newly introduced in that?
I don't object to it.
Okay. I'm just puzzled because that's the first time I've heard it. It was my understanding that the decision with regard to the disciplinary action with Officer Cole was handed to you. That's something that the police chief would normally handle, correct?
Yes.
But in this case, because he was directly involved, it was taken from him and given to you. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. With regard to the other people potentially, anybody else who could possibly face discipline as a result of this, why then would the police chief be in charge of those investigations or disciplinary decisions and not you?
Object to lack of foundation.
No, that's what you just asked him if he was.
I asked if he was involved. I didn't say the police chief was the one making those decisions. That's what you characterized it as.
All right. Well, then let me reframe that. I misunderstood that. Then, if not you, who would be making the decision with regard to other disciplinary investigations in the police department related to the August 9th, 2016 events?
At this point in time, I would, since Ciaschini is the interim police chief, he would, I'm sure, be involved at some level. It is possible, however, since Jason Cischini is only an interim, that the city manager might delegate that responsibility to me again. I don't know that.
Are you aware of any active disciplinary employment investigations related to any other employees at the police department related to the events of August 9th, 2016?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. I don't have anything further.
Can we take a break? I need to take the machine off.
Let's see.
It is now.
So I can ask a couple questions? So you're back on the record again. When you relied on your decision, you say you met with Lieutenant Terry Cochran before.
Yes.
Okay. How much did you rely on what your conversation with Terry Cochran was?
My conversation with Terry Cochran was, at that time, he had either just gotten the FDLE or he was anticipating it. Okay, so it was not substance of that at all. When I spoke with Terry, the couple of things that I remember the most was the bullets thing. He had the pictures of the bullets and the different types in the boxes. The boxes were really critical to me. But beyond that, and I don't think I was at all shy about saying that he can't work in that department anymore. Terry was vociferous in his statement that he would not be able to serve as a line officer. He would not be able to serve in any capacity in that position in the police department. And
why?
Don't trust him. And again, I can only speak to the conversation we had. They didn't trust him before the event, and they don't trust him. They didn't, and they trusted him less afterwards. And
so you say you talked about you talked with him and he discussed the boxes?
Yes.
Okay.
He was familiar. That was something that he had enough information. I've never owned a gun, like I said. Well, I take that back. One time I had to get rid of it.
You mentioned that.
But you know, he, in my mind, someone who is a law enforcement officer. And we're not talking about a static situation where he had a bag full of bullets and a bag full of bullets. He had boxed hardware, and the boxes are so clearly different. There's no way that he should have put what were clearly live rounds into his pistol. And again, that's...
Did you discuss with him the use of a personal firearm during a city-sponsored training action?
Yes, we did. You know, one of the things that was part of the discussion, but to my satisfaction, it was almost rendered moot, but it was part of the discussion, was that that was a firearm that he had never registered with the department, which is required by one of the SOPs. It was rendered moot only from the standpoint that he had been using that weapon for training purposes, and it's kind of like everybody knew about it anyway, but it had never been formally registered with the department.
Okay. So the basis of your decision then, to be very clear and concise, for me, what is the clear and concise basis for your decision then?
He shot a 73-year-old innocent woman in a training exercise. He can't work for the city of Punta Gorda Police Department anymore because without credibility, he can't perform the essential functions of the job. It's really that simple.
Okay. Thank you.
We have no further witnesses.
Okay.
Okay, I don't have any further questions here. What I would like to do for our presentation is our presentation exists solely on the documents that are in this exhibit book. And so I would like to walk you through those documents and specific portions of those documents as we believe they relate to this case and the determination you have to make.
Okay. Do you mind me telling you that I am familiar with some of these?
Okay, well, we won't spend a lot of time, but there's specific elements, particularly of some of the interviews, that I think are essential as it relates.
You can spend as long as you need. I am familiar with some of these, but please,
okay,
take your time.
I want to start with the letters of February 22nd and March 9th that establish the reasons Mr. Wickstrom made the determination, as he's testified, to terminate Lee Cole's employment. It is because he believed that Lee Cole failed to take appropriate and reasonable steps to ensure the safety of Mary Knowlton, and he failed to ensure that no live ammunition was used. That's essentially A and B of the first part. The second paragraph doesn't come into play yet because these are pending criminal charges about which Lee Cole is presumed to be innocent and may be found innocent. He may be fully acquitted of the manslaughter charges. So 2 does not come into play any more for Lee Cole than it would for Chief Lewis. They're in the same boat with regard to pending criminal charges. So number 2 is not in play as we sit here today. You have acknowledged in your exchanges with us your recognition that the standard by which the agreed upon disciplinary procedures dictate that this be judged on the just cause standard, and that the burden on the Human Resources Director is to prove that he had, by a preponderance of the evidence, that he had just cause to terminate Lee Cole. And I'm going to spend a little time in my presentation approaching this from a standard which has been widely accepted since the late 1960s from an arbitrator's decision in the late 1960s that established what have come to be known as 7 tests of just cause discipline. And the idea is that these are basically questions you ask yourself about the application of the discipline in a particular case. And some arbitrators believe that if even one of them the answer is no, then just cause cannot be found. Others believe that the more of them for which the answer is no, the weaker the case for just cause, proving just cause gets. And the one I want to spend my attention on 4 of them. The first has to do with the proof of the offense. And again, the offense is that Lee Cole failed to take appropriate and reasonable steps to ensure the safety of Mary Knowlton, and that he failed to ensure that no live ammunition was used. First, we believe the answer to this is no. We don't believe that the investigations substantiate that claim. First, the ammunition Officer Cole was using on this night was provided to him by his supervisor, Lieutenant Katie Heck. She provided him the ammunition from her husband, who was with the Charlotte County Sheriff's Department, also a canine officer, also carried a weapon to use for a blank weapon to use for training. And if you look on Exhibit 4, pages 10 and 12, there's an exchange between the FDLE and interviewer that begins on page 10 and goes on through page 12, in which Lieutenant Heck, who was at this time Lee Cole's direct supervisor, confirms that she supplied him with blanks. because they were moving. It would have happened on the July 4th weekend, and they were blanks that were left over from her husband because we determined we didn't need them, 1 box. And they were left over from the sheriff's department. It was an actual cube. It was older cardboard, you know, open from the top. So he gets ammunition provided to him by Lieutenant Heck, and it is represented to him that this is blank ammunition. Despite receiving the ammunition from his supervisor and having that ammunition represented as blanks, he takes the added step on several occasions in the interviews. There were several instances marked in the interviews, both with the sheriff's office personnel that he trained with and some of his fellow officers who were with him at various times, who confirmed that there were on multiple occasions in using the weapon and before using the weapon in other canine training exercises, he would confirm that they were blanks by firing them into the ground. This is confirmed in the interview of Coel Sheriff's Department Sergeant Jason Doherty, which were in the supplements that were provided earlier, pages 285 to 306 of his actual interview. He discusses that. Exhibit 3, serial number 64, Charlotte County Sheriff's Department K-9 Corporal Leonard Pravat also corroborates the fact that Lee Cole and others using Lee's gun had on several occasions when they were out at the Speedway, and I think another one at a gun range, had tested these rounds that he had been given to confirm that they did not produce a projectile. No one involved confirmed that anything other than they were blanks, and they were used in these training exercises. Third, the August 9th Citizens Academy was organized and controlled by Lieutenant Heck and not by Officer Cole. The chief of police, there was a captain involved, and at least 2 lieutenants involved in organizing and putting this event together. Part of organizing this event through the chain of command involves the responsibility for safety. Safety of the people participating in the event and safety for the people attending the event. That was not taken care of. From protective equipment that Lee Cole had to track down after he arrived, had to go find 2 of his supervisors to unlock storage areas to find equipment that should have already been provided and made available as a part of the planning for this that wasn't, to the assignment and use of safety officers. There was a safety officer assigned apparently to Ms. Knowlton for her weapon, but there was not one and no consideration of a safety officer with regard to Officer Cole. Again, towards the chain of command. Officer Cole was the lowest ranking officer at this event. He was not a decision maker. He was there to do what he was told to do. Fifth, Lieutenant Christopher Salzman confirmed that even he could not tell that the ammunition that Officer Cole used that had been provided by Lieutenant Heck, he could not tell whether they were live rounds or blanks by looking at them. This is a superior officer with many more years of experience than Officer Cole. He confirmed that they looked the same as live rounds. The weapon and ammunition that Officer Cole used at this demonstration was the same weapon and ammunition that the department had used in other citizens' academies and in other demonstrations. In fact, the statements dictate that the weapon had been borrowed from him by other people taking part in these academies and demonstrations that Lee Cole was not even involved in. Despite using ammunition he believed to be blanks, despite the fact that on several occasions he had test fired the ammunition out at the range into the berm to confirm that there were no projectiles, Officer Cole still took the added step the night of this demonstration of not pointing the weapon at the decedent. He was involved and he took the extra step of pointing the weapon downward. All of the shells at very close range were fired into the vehicle, not at her. 3 of them ricocheted off the hood. 1 went through the door as he was running as a part of the role play. He did not point the weapon at her even though he was within close range, even though he had extensive firearms training. Certainly if he was not taking a safety measure and was pointing the weapon at her, she would have been injured, she would have died as a result of a direct hit from the weapon. The FDLE report, which was exhaustive, determined that all 4 rounds struck the car. He's a tall guy, a big guy. For him to shoot into the car, he was shooting down. He was taking the added safety measure, despite believing that he had blanks, of not pointing the weapon at a civilian. Corporal Pravat confirmed in his statement, Exhibit 3, serial number 64, that it was always Officer Cole's practice when participating in scenarios to fire the weapon down, whether he was working with dogs or in these other scenarios. That's Exhibit 3, serial number 64 towards the back. Page 2 of his summary of his statement. Probably most important with regard to the Miss Knowlton's death was the lack of a safety officer. Captain Caschini testified that there is always supposed to be a safety officer assigned for these scenarios. If you look in his statement on Exhibit 8, page 794, the investigator asks, is it normal practice or through your policies that you are called to have safety officers on scene? And he says, beginning on line 14, and there's always been a safety officer, someone who's always kind of checking your equipment, checking to make sure everything is the way it's supposed to be. Captain Woodard, under Exhibit 6, confirms this same thing. Pages 734, 735. The investigator asks, as far as training, he answers, as far as training, when we do scenario-based trainings, you're 100% correct. We do safety checks, we check each other, and then we make sure. I did not do that tonight. The investigator says, when you do these types of scenarios, say tonight or even in the past, is there an assigned person who may be, I don't know what you may call it here, it would call it the safety officer. Was there such a role this evening? Captain Woodard says, in the past, it has always in the past, and I'm not talking about every scenario like in-service training, when we have done these, we all pretty much set as safety officers. The investigator on the next page says, who would normally be a safety officer? Somebody who's closest to the scenario? Beginning on line 12, Captain Woodard says, I wasn't in complete control of the scenario, and like I said, I did not check him. Continuing in his statement back on page 808, the investigator says, anybody else playing the role of safety officer that would have, checked the weapon that was used by Officer Cole to make sure the gun was in proper condition and with the right ammo inside, such as blanks. Captain Woodard says, no, sir, I don't know who was. I don't think there was a designated safety officer that night. Going back to Exhibit 10, to Lieutenant Salzman's statement on page 1308. The investigator says, did anybody say a safety officer? Did the safety officer, did they check that gun beforehand? Lieutenant Salzman says, I don't know which officer was checking the weapon with him when it was loaded. And the investigator says, but it is normal for somebody to, and he says, yes. And then down below on line 21, would that have been your purview or would that have been Captain Woodard's purview? Lieutenant Salzman says, well, in this particular case, it would have been incumbent on both of us. We've confirmed that the ammunition he was using that he believed to be blanks was provided by his supervisor, Lieutenant Heck. The second prong of just cause discipline is equal application of the city's rules and application of punishments. It's been confirmed through testimony here that no one other than Officer Coel has suffered any amount of discipline, despite the findings of FDLE and despite the findings of Arnold Gibbs. Arnold Gibbs' report clearly doesn't saddle this responsibility for this death on Officer Coel. He saddles this on a department-wide systemic failure, a lack of policies, and the lack of the command officers to follow established safety procedures. The FDLE report sides and assigns the responsibility for the death primarily to the inability of Officer Coel and others, including Lieutenant Salzman, their inability to differentiate one round from another, a blank from live ammunition. The city has apparently determined that these other findings, despite these other findings, these other failures in the system and the other failures by other employees that have been identified in both the exhaustive FDLE report and Arnold Gibbs report, despite that, not a single level of discipline, not a written reprimand, not a suspension, nothing for any other employee involved in this, except Chief Lewis as a result of misdemeanor criminal charges, and he's on an extended paid administrative leave. Based on that, termination is too severe for Officer Coel. The argument that he could not come back and could not be trusted because something he did contributed to a death, the same could be said for any one of these people, according to the FDLE's report, according to Chief Gibbs' report. The same distrust, if it's distrust that results from somebody dropping the ball, and as a result of dropping the ball, a death results, then the same thing would apply to each of these other people. And yet we have taken the only non-officer involved in this and ended a career and made this individual a pariah. If the chief can be put on extended, indefinite, paid administrative leave pending the outcome of his criminal charges, the same could have been done for Lee Coel pending the outcome. He's convicted, it takes care of itself, as I'm assuming it will with the chief of police. So to the extent that that played a role, equal treatment would dictate that they both should be treated the same way pending the outcome of their criminal charges. With regard to the responsibility for ensuring Ms. Knowlton's safety and for ensuring that this weapon contained blanks and not live ammunition, the FDLE confirmed that that fell to a variety of people. Chief Gibbs put it 100% squarely on the command staff, of which we've confirmed here Lee Coel was not a member. He was not in charge of the demonstration that led to the death. He was not a command level officer. He was using ammunition provided to him by his supervisor, which he and apparently she believed to be blank ammunition. On several occasions prior to August 9th, 2016, he took the added measure of testing the ammunition for safety purposes. At no time did he get the impression that that ammunition he had been provided produced a projectile, nor did anyone else that tested it with it. If Officer Coel was as reckless as he's being represented, why, when he arrived at the event, did he take it upon himself to track down two supervisors to let him into locked areas, storage areas, to retrieve safety equipment that he and the other officers participating in the event were going to need, and the civilians were going to need? There's no disputing that command staff failed to assign a safety officer, something that several of the command staff, including the lieutenant that testified here today, said it should have always been done. It was not done here. Even if it had been done, several of the officers that were and commanders that were interviewed by FDLE said they couldn't differentiate the rounds that were he had been provided from live ammunition. So it may have occurred even if there had been a safety officer, because the safety officer may have made the same error. And yet, despite believing that the rounds he had were blanks, and despite having field tested those rounds, he still shot away from Miss Knowlton. The round that punctured her aorta and her diaphragm and resulted in her death ricocheted off the hood. Something that he had, there's no way he could have been aiming in her direction for that round to ricochet off the hood of the vehicle. FDL established that there's no evidence that Officer Coel intended to use lethal ammunition while participating in the role play scenario. Furthermore, it is apparent that Officer Coel's and others' inability to differentiate between blank firing cartridges and the .38 caliber HBWC ammunition resulted in Miss Knowlton's death. And finally, Arnold Gibbs concluded it is clear that the command level officers used bad judgment, and the department was lacking sufficient policies and administrative guidelines to control against decisions which allowed for the tragic incident which occurred during the Citizens Police Academy. We've established that the implementation and drafting of departmental policies and administrative guidelines doesn't fall to Officer Coel. Officer Coel pulled the trigger, participating in an event he was asked to participate in an effort to put the Punta Gorda Police Department, cast that department in the most favorable light possible to the public it served. Everything he did was done at the direction of his superiors. The FDLE report, which was exhaustive, did not find that there was one thing that he didn't do that he should have. Not one. The FDLE report was clear that he had no intent to use live ammunition. And his actions of that night showed him to be safety conscious, possibly the only person participating or organizing the entire event who was paying attention to anything to do with safety. And yet, as the tragic events unfolded, he's the lowest man on the totem pole, and he happened to be the person that pulled the trigger, that the projectile ricocheted and cost Miss Knowlton her life. We understand that there's a feeling that someone's got to pay for this. But it is glaring that the lowest man on the totem pole is being terminated while everyone else that the report points to as being responsible skates absolutely free. Finally, with regard to the fourth test of just cause discipline, was the investigation that led to the determination to terminate, was it done fairly? Mr. Wickstrom has admitted here that he did not review the FDLE report prior to making the decision. He essentially made it off of a charge sheet from the state attorney's office and a conversation with Lieutenant Cochran, and may have reviewed the Officer Coel's personnel file, though he said it wouldn't have mattered to him, which tells me that his mind was made up before he ever conducted the investigation. So the investigation clearly wasn't unbiased, and it clearly didn't involve the volume of evidence about what did or did not happen on August 9th, and whose responsibility, who was responsible or whose acts or omissions may have been contributed to the events that led to Miss Knowlton's tragic death. We believe just cause fails for all 4 points. And we would ask you to reinstate Officer Coel and to place him on paid administrative leave in the same manner that the chief has been placed pending the outcome of his criminal charges. And we appreciate your time.
So we're doing closings.
No. Are you going to ask any questions?
No,
That
I'm
was
not
an
going to
evidence.
ask
That
him.
was essentially his closing
Okay.
presentation.
You're still planning to do a brief?
Yeah.
I don't have any questions. I would do a brief closing. I guess I will do a brief as well, but I would like to respond to a few of those points in closing. Is it appropriate? I'm not going to belabor it because I will do a brief, but on the points that Mr. Brantley raises, the one distinguishing factor here is, as he said, he pulled the trigger. The misassumption that the union and Officer Coel are arguing here is that because there is responsibility that might be spread around to others, is that somehow exonerates Officer Coel. We have not made determinations as to whether others are responsible or who may be disciplined. Those investigations are ongoing. What we have in front of us today is whether there's cause to terminate Officer Coel. And the facts as they pertain to Officer Coel are not disputed. He was given an opportunity to come to a pre-disciplinary conference. He and his representative did. They didn't dispute anything that happened on August 9th. He was the guy that loaded the gun and mistook live ammunition for the blanks. They haven't disputed that here today. They say, well, the investigation that Phil Wickstrom undertook was somehow unfair, but they haven't pointed out where. What fact is different than what Mr. Wickstrom testified to? There aren't any. The facts, as they pertain to Officer Coel, really aren't disputed. As it may pertain to others who may be responsible, the facts are still being gathered and uncovered. We'll point these out, I'm sure, in our briefs, but the FDLE report does not conclusively establish that either he was exonerated or others are more to blame. It certainly points out, and we would concede that there were other steps that could have been taken, like the fact that there was no safety officer. It points out that a few people, looking at the picture of the two cartridges, can't tell the difference just from looking at the cartridges. But nowhere in that report is that anybody else looking at the boxes. And the boxes and the pictures that we showed in the exhibit, I think it was 10, the only person that had access to that on August 9th and looked at it was Lee Coel. And one box says blank. The other box doesn't say blank, and in fact says 148 grain, which you can't have with blanks. One box, they're all just thrown in there jumbled up because it can't explode and shoot out projectiles. The other one, they're all individually packaged the way normal ammunition would be packaged. These are the kinds of things that Lee Coel should have recognized and did not recognize. The FDLE report shows that, yes, he shot this, apparently, according to his attorney's position, that he shot these same rounds in other training sessions with the sheriff's office. What you'll see in those reports, and we'll point out, is that others didn't know that he was shooting apparently live ammunition at that point in time. But rather than exonerate Officer Coel, in our view, that makes it worse. It means he's made this same mistake on 2 or 3 occasions. If that's the case, then it was only a matter of time, unfortunately, for something like this would happen. There is, by the way, in the FDLE report, a sheriff's officer that, when he shot into the ground on one occasion, indicates he thought he might have saw something moving in the ground. Which, of course, was unbeknownst to anybody on August 9th, but that, for some reason, that deputy said, I just trusted that Officer Coel. It must have been something else. There's a lot of ifs and buts that if things have been different, we might not be here, but we are here. In our view, Officer Coel has committed actions that should lead to his discharge. He should uphold that discharge. It's his responsibility to know if you're loading a weapon that you have to load blanks instead of live ammunition. He did get the ammunition from Lieutenant Heck. Lieutenant Heck is recently resigning. Her statement says she gave it to him in a bag of boxes, In that bag were blanks. The other, you saw the picture of the one bullet that looks different. Those were given to him by Lieutenant Heck. They're moving. They took all their blanks and gave it to him. Should she have recognized that too? Perhaps. And maybe there would be some responsibility to her, but it doesn't exonerate him then subsequently using them without looking at the box, without recognizing apparently on several occasions. There, in the statements from the sheriff's office, there's also an indication that the sheriff's deputies did chastise him on one prior occasion for pointing the weapon in their general direction. So contrary to what the union is arguing here, he hasn't always pointed more, and they said at that point in time he's pointing it down, but that's not safe either because it could ricochet. We were supposed to point it straight down. So what you have here ultimately then is the state attorney, despite the fact that the FDLE did indicate that there were several officers that couldn't tell the cartridges apart. The FDLE turns it over to the state attorney, and the state attorney obviously thought there was something to charge, and they were charging him. You're not charged with trying to determine whether he's guilty of a crime. We're certainly not back here going to make that argument. That's not the standard here. We have a different standard whether there's cause to terminate his employment. The burden's on the department head. It's a preponderance of the evidence, and more likely than not, as opposed to the beyond any reasonable doubt. We think, quite frankly, that they've established it. Officer Coel has not provided any testimony other than the FDLE report. He hasn't contested any of the facts relied upon by Mr. Wickstrom. I think, tellingly, Mr. Wickstrom and Lieutenant Cochran both testified that you can't have Officer Coel come back and be an effective officer in the department. And in our view, that really sums it up, quite frankly, because even if he beats the criminal charge, which likely won't happen for months, if not a year, he could never be effective again because of his poor judgment used in this particular case. Whether or not that's true of others is still to be decided, but that's not the issue in this case. And we will reserve the right to flesh this all out in our brief. That's all I have. Thanks.
So, based on the fact that it's we've been at it for not quite 3 hours, how long do you think it will take to produce transcripts?
I can have it to you tomorrow if that's when you want it.
You can.
If you'd like it tomorrow, yes.
Okay. So we will get the transcripts tomorrow. We will have our records folks who are experts in redacting take a look at it, redact what needs to get redacted. I'm not aware of much, but we'll go through and redact it, and we will then get it to you as quickly as we can. So you may be able to get it before next Friday. We'll see. Do we have anything else?
On the transcripts, are we turning over the exhibits to the court reporter, or do we want to keep them here? Because the redaction, I don't think there'll be much in that transcript. If anything, there's maybe stuff in the exhibits, the autopsies and...
I looked at stuff in here, and there's some there's stuff we have redacted as a city.
Well, then this may have already been redacted. The one that's in our book, you mean?
I'm not sure if the autopsy, I think Brian may be right. I'm not sure if it's got enough redacted out. There may be, I saw some of the medical records were blacked out, but I don't know if it's
Well, I can tell you my exhibits, I don't think the portion of the FDLE that I used in Exhibit 13 is redacted. I excluded a lot of those reports. I just had the summary, so I don't know if maybe that's why. But
well, the transcripts itself is what we're going to focus on. This other information, do we have to?
Well, I'm just saying, do we want to give that to the court reporter to have this copy floating around that I know is sensitive? Or if you're agreeable to have it retained by the city, and I don't know if we're allowed to do that.
From my position, this is a hearing, and usually the judge and clerk retain the exhibits in a hearing or a trial.
That's fine.
So as long as you put on the
That's
record
fine.
that I
That way
don't
you can
have
redact it
them,
if
I'm
we
fine
need
with
to.
that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I would say
Mainly the
let's
autopsy
do that.
report is what I definitely would look at.
So they will stay with me.
Yes.
All right.
And I'm not saying it's not redacted, I'm just saying I know that would have confidential information in it. Could have social security numbers, could have.
I just don't want inadvertently any way of getting confidential information out there.
Right.
Okay, so
Have
they
everybody
will,
blaming all of us.
so they will stay here. But the transcript itself, we've already been requested by the media for copies of that. It is public information. So as soon as we provide it to you, we will be placing it on our website for viewing. The transcripts.
Right.
Anything else?
Anything confidential in the transcript? No,
No.
nothing about it.
Nothing further.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey Charlotte County, this is Charlotte County COPWATCH, and I wanted to explain what fair use is. You can use pieces of news articles if you're doing it for news reporting, you have commentary, and you're doing it for education purposes. So that's what fair use is, as you can see right here. Another reason why I wanted to make this video is to let you know I just joined with Patreon. A nice thing with Patreon, I make no money on YouTube. They took the money away years ago, and so this is another way to give, and it's a nice thing too because you can give monthly. You can give $1, $5, $10, whatever. I do 4 to 5 hours a day on trying to wake the sheeple up on how corrupt it is and different ways that you can fight the corruption. So Patreon is a way that you can do it, and then of course the old way is still there. Donate to Sheriff County COPWATCH with PayPal or credit card. So keep that in mind. 4 to 5 hours a day. I make no money, but the corruption happened to me and I'm sick of it, so I'm trying to wake people up. But my wife would love it if if we could get some help out there. There's 47,000 subscribers. Just think if each one of you subscribers just gave let's say actually yes, $1 a month. 47,000 subscribers gave $1 a month. That would be awesome. That's not going to happen. But anyways, that would be great if it did happen. But do the math in your head. Just think about it. Like I said, 4 to 5 hours a day. I get no money from YouTube. YouTube has gone nuts. You can't do anything anymore. They're taking the money away everywhere. So these are a couple different ways that you can still help out with all this time that I put in. And as you know, I'm in a special situation where at least I can do it. 4 to 5 hours a day. We have a cleaning company during the day. That's what allows me to do this, and we're debt free. So this is my hobby. I don't go fishing and all that other crap. I try to save the world. So help me out to make the wife happy, man. In fact, if you guys did give $1 a day, and there was 47,000 of you, and you did it, and each of you gave $1, and that was every month, oh my God, yes, I could quit. I could start suing them. Another idea too that we have is if I got some funds, we could actually contact everyone that has been ticketed and or arrested and put in jail and start sending them postcards to let them know we're here, and to see if everything went all right, and if it didn't, find out their story. So we could even do more investigations and more lawsuits. Lawsuits take money. So just think about that. 47,000 of you so far right now. $1 a day. $1 a month on Patreon, or $5 a month Patreon, 10, 20, whatever. Just do the math in your head, help out. This is a lot of work every single day. Thanks.